Story 1. It was supposed to be just a regular exploration, something we did often. We were in our late 20s looking for something to distract ourselves from the daily grind. A few friends and I had decided to check out an old lava tube we'd heard about half a mile off the beaten path. The whole area was rugged, desolate, and full of strange stories. But I didn't expect any of them to be true. We always thought of ourselves as the "it's just a story" type, you know? So when we packed up our gear that morning, it was just another adventure. The tube entrance wasn't marked. We had to climb over some rocks, squeezing through some dense brush before we finally found it. An opening, just big enough for us to fit. We didn't think twice about it. The first few hundred feet were easy, just some basic scrambling and steady walking. The air was damp, cool against the heat of the day. We laughed, cracked jokes, pointed out the strange formations in the rock. The glow sticks we brought lit up the passageway in eerie green, casting long shadows on the walls. It wasn't until we went further in that I started to feel it, like the air was thickening, heavy somehow. A strange hum lingered in the back of my mind, but I didn't say anything. No one else did either. We just kept moving forward. The tunnel twisted and turned, narrow in places and wide in others. The further we went, the more we felt alone. Like the world outside had simply vanished. It was like a weird time capsule, untouched, forgotten. Then came the sound. At first I thought it was just my imagination, maybe the echo of our footsteps, or the distant rumble of the earth shifting. But the others heard it too. We paused. The noise was low, like a distant thrum at first, but it grew quickly. I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my boots, like a pulse in the ground beneath us, a low rhythmic rumbling. It was strange at first, but as it got louder, it became more unsettling. At first we joked about it. Probably just some animal, someone said, trying to laugh it off. But none of us were laughing. The vibrations were more intense now. It was like the earth itself was alive, a massive heartbeat beneath us. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "We should turn back," I said, but my voice came out barely a whisper. No one responded immediately, and the rumbling continued to build, now filling the tunnel with its deafening presence. "We'll be fine," Mark said, trying to sound confident, but his voice trembled. He wasn't convincing anyone, least of all me. We kept moving. We had to. It was too late to turn back. I kept looking over my shoulder, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The ground was vibrating more now. The hum was no longer distant. It was here, all around us. The air felt thick and heavy, pressing against my chest, making it harder to breathe. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice tight. We all froze. A crack, a sharp, jarring sound came from deep within the earth. We all turned in unison, as if expecting something to appear behind us, something we couldn't see but felt. My heart hammered in my chest, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone anymore. Whatever was making the noise wasn't natural. The rumbling intensified, vibrating through my bones, and I could hear my breath coming faster, sharper. We needed to get out of there. Suddenly, a loud boom echoed through the tunnel. I thought the world was going to collapse in on us. The ground shook violently under my feet, and I nearly lost my balance. We all stumbled forward, trying to regain our footing. "Get out!" I shouted. And that's when the panic really set in. Sarah was already ahead, her legs moving in a blur as she pushed toward the entrance. Mark was behind her, still looking back as if he expected something to appear in the shadows, something that wasn't supposed to be there. I felt a pull in my chest, a warning, like something deep within me was telling me to run faster, to get the hell out before whatever was down there found us. The air seemed to grow heavier with each passing second, suffocating us as we pushed through the dark. The ground shook again, this time almost throwing me off balance. The rumbling became a roar, deafening and relentless. It was everywhere. The vibrations were so strong now that I couldn't tell where the sound was coming from. It was as if the tunnel itself was alive, shaking with fury. We pushed forward, gasping for air, our hearts pounding in our ears. The exit was so close now, just a few more feet. But as we neared the mouth of the tunnel, I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of something above us. It wasn't footsteps. It was more like the rolling thunder, like something massive was passing right overhead. I stopped dead in my tracks. It was too close, too real. "Move!" Mark screamed, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the entrance. I didn't know how much time passed before we finally burst out of the tunnel, gasping for fresh air. But when we did, the first thing I saw was the rail line. It stretched off into the distance, old and rusted, but still very much there. A train. It had passed right above us while we were in there, its heavy engine creating the vibrations and rumbling. It was a train of all things. I felt a chill run through me, not from the cold, but from the realization. We'd been right beneath it. Not only was there a train, but it had been moving with such force that we hadn't even felt it above us, only below. We hadn't heard it approach. We hadn't heard it leave. It was so loud, so persistent, that it had overtaken everything. The rumbling of the earth, the hum, the feeling that we weren't alone. None of us spoke as we looked back at the opening of the tube. I didn't know what had happened down there. I still don't. But I do know this. That noise wasn't just the train. There was something else in the air that day, something we couldn't explain, something that made us believe for just a moment that the earth itself was trying to swallow us whole. We didn't go back into that tunnel. None of us ever will. Story 2. I live in a small town on the outskirts of a dense forest. We're far enough from the city that the nights feel endless and quiet, and the only sound you really hear is the wind moving through the trees or the occasional car passing down the gravel road. I've always been the adventurous type, more than willing to explore the unknown. My friend Sam is the same way. We've spent countless hours wandering through the woods, exploring caves, and finding our way into places most people would never dare go. But what happened that day still shakes me to my core. It was a dry Sunday, the kind of day where the air is still and the world seems almost too quiet. Sam and I decided to visit an old forgotten quarry about 20 miles out of town. It had been inactive for years, long enough that no one in their right mind would expect anything unusual. It wasn't the first time we'd been there. We'd explored the surrounding area before, but today we decided to go deeper, much deeper. We'd heard rumors of tunnels, some that stretched under the earth for miles, remnants of old mining operations long abandoned. Some people even said the place was haunted, that there were strange sounds echoing from the depths, but we never paid much attention to that kind of thing. The air grew colder as we descended, and the faint, musty smell of old stone and damp earth filled our nostrils. We had no real plan. We were just curious. Sam had brought along a couple of flashlights, and I had my phone for navigation, but nothing too fancy. The deeper we went, the more the world outside seemed to disappear. It was just the sound of our footsteps echoing off the walls and the occasional drip of water from some unseen source above. We crawled through tight spaces, maneuvering through jagged rocks, until we reached a narrow tunnel that seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of us. It was cramped and the air was thick, but we were determined. The sound of our movements was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the tunnel. It wasn't until we'd been crawling for what felt like an hour that we noticed it. A low, distant hum. At first I thought it was just the wind or the natural shifting of the earth. But then the ground beneath us trembled slightly, just enough for Sam to pause. I stopped, my heart thumping in my chest. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the floor like some massive machine was starting up far beneath us. Sam's eyes locked with mine, his expression tense, but neither of us said anything. The hum was constant, low, almost vibrating the very walls around us. It was too steady to be anything natural. Then it hit us. It wasn't the hum itself that was unsettling. It was the way it seemed to build. The vibrations intensified. It felt like something huge, something immense was moving below us, a giant mass shifting through the earth. We couldn't see it, but we could feel it. Each pulse of sound seemed to shake our bones, and it only grew stronger. I swallowed, trying to suppress the fear creeping up my spine. "Sam, you feel that, right?" He nodded, his eyes wide. "Yeah. What the hell is that?" We stayed frozen, listening to the vibrations. It felt like the ground was alive, like something was pushing its way through the rock beneath us. "Maybe it's just a cave-in," I said. though I didn't believe it. The quarries had been abandoned for years, and even if there was some residual mining equipment down there, it wouldn't be powerful enough to cause this. We exchanged a nervous glance, then Sam spoke. We should head back. But I didn't want to. Curiosity kept me rooted in place. I needed to know what was happening. I needed to understand what we were hearing. I motioned for Sam to keep moving forward. He hesitated but reluctantly followed. The tunnel twisted and turned, and the vibrations persisted. They grew more intense, sending shudders up my spine. But there was something else, something we couldn't put our finger on. It was as if the hum was pulsing in a pattern, as if it was waiting for something. I told myself it was just the natural shifts of the earth, but every fiber of my being screamed at me to leave. Sam's flashlight flickered, and in the dim light, his face looked pale, his eyes wide and unblinking. We need to turn back, he repeated, his voice shaking. This isn't right. But I didn't listen. I pressed forward as if something inside me was compelling me to keep going. I kept telling myself it was nothing, but the truth was, something had changed. It felt like the world itself had shifted. We crawled deeper into the belly of the earth, and that's when the vibrations stopped, abruptly, as if someone had flicked a switch. The silence was deafening. We paused, not knowing whether to move forward or turn back. But then, in the sudden, overwhelming quiet, there was a sound, a loud crack. It sounded like something massive splitting open far beneath us. I couldn't place it, but the sound was unmistakable. It reverberated through the walls, and the very ground beneath us seemed to groan. My heart raced, adrenaline flooding my system. I could feel the cold sweat on the back of my neck. Sam's hand gripped my arm, and I could hear him breathing heavily in the dark. We're leaving, he whispered, his voice tight with fear. I didn't argue. We turned around, scrambling back through the tight spaces, but it was different now. The hum, the vibrations, had started again, but it was louder this time, closer. The ground seemed to pulse beneath us, each vibration deeper, heavier, as if something was chasing us. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My instincts screamed at me to get out. We crawled faster, panicked, until we finally reached the mouth of the tunnel. The light of the outside world, the safety of daylight, seemed miles away. We didn't speak as we exited, both of us still feeling the tremors of what we just experienced. Neither of us said anything for a long time, but I could see it in Sam's eyes. He knew. He knew something was wrong, and I wasn't about to argue with him. That was the last time we went near that quarry. Story 3. We had been down there for hours. The air in the mine was damp, thick with the smell of rust and old earth. There were 5 of us, me, my friends Alex, Sarah, Ben and Jason. We'd come to explore, nothing more, just to see what an abandoned mine was like. I wasn't afraid. At least I didn't think I was. We brought glow sticks with us to mark our path. We didn't want to get lost, especially in a place like this. The tunnels twisted and turned, a maze of jagged walls and low ceilings. Some parts so narrow we had to squeeze through. The further we went, the quieter it got. The hum of the world above seemed to fade, replaced by the distant echo of dripping water. It was strange how peaceful it felt at first. Then the deeper we ventured, the more I noticed the silence. There were no sounds of animals or insects, nothing but the shuffle of our feet and the faint cracking of our glow sticks when we bent them to reactivate their light. We didn't talk much. The mine felt oppressive in a way I couldn't explain. By the time we decided to head back, the mine had taken on a completely different atmosphere. The light from our glow sticks barely illuminated the path, casting long, eerie shadows on the jagged rock walls. The place felt wrong. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. Something was off. But it wasn't until we reached the first marker, one of the glow sticks we'd set up earlier, that I realized something was terribly wrong. The glow stick wasn't there. I paused, squinting into the dim light. "Hey, did anyone move the glow stick from here?" I asked, looking around at my friends. They all shook their heads. Jason stepped forward, frowning. "I'm sure it was here, right?" Ben said. He was always the one who liked to joke around, but his voice had a nervous edge to it now. "I swear it was," I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. I looked down the tunnel, trying to make sense of it. There was no way we could have walked past it without seeing it. We shrugged it off at first. Maybe it had just fallen over, or someone had kicked it by accident. It didn't seem like a big deal, so we kept moving. But then, as we went further, we realized something worse. One by one, each of the glow sticks we had set up, every single one, was either gone or out of place. "It's like someone's been here," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Someone's messing with us." It wasn't a joke anymore. The air around us seemed to thicken, like we weren't alone in the mine. I started to feel it too, the unmistakable sense of being watched. My heart began to beat faster, my palms dampening. There was no way anyone else would be down here. We had made sure to come on a day when no one would be around. This place was supposed to be abandoned, but someone had been following us. I could feel it now, the eerie sensation of being trailed through the dark, of someone else's footsteps mimicking ours just out of sight. The others must have felt it too. We all fell into a tense, uneasy silence as we continued. But every time we reached a glow stick marker, it had been moved or was gone completely. By the time we reached the next junction, I was starting to panic. It wasn't just the missing glow sticks. It was the feeling, like someone was just around the corner, waiting. I wanted to call out, but the thought of breaking the silence made my stomach churn. We had to find our way out. I was sure now, someone had been watching us, waiting for us to get lost. And that's when we heard it. A sound from deep within the mine. A faint scraping, like something or someone was dragging against the stone. It came from one of the tunnels we hadn't been down yet. It was a sound I'll never forget, the sort of noise that made every hair on my neck stand up. Without saying a word, we turned and started to run. I don't know how long we ran for. My breath came in sharp gasps, my legs burning with the effort. But every turn, every tunnel seemed to lead us deeper into the mine. It was as if we were moving in circles. Every time I looked behind us, the light from the remaining glow sticks cast distorted shadows. But there was nothing there. Nothing that could explain the noise we had heard. The further we went, the more desperate I became. My mind raced, trying to figure out where the hell the exit was. But it felt like we were being funneled into the depths, like the mine was closing in on us. And then, as if it were some sick joke, the glow sticks disappeared altogether. The last of them, the ones we had kept closest to us, were gone. We were lost. The panic set in full force. My breath was ragged, my chest tight with fear. We should have gone back earlier. We should have left before it got dark. But it was too late for regrets. "We need to get out," I shouted, though my voice was barely a whisper in the cavernous silence. There was no way anyone could hear us down here. And then, a voice. It was quiet at first, barely audible, but it sent ice through my veins. A whisper, low and grating, like something or someone was right behind me. "Get out!" I froze. I don't know what happened next. I just remember grabbing Jason's arm and pulling him toward the nearest tunnel, not caring anymore if we were heading in the right direction. We stumbled through the mine, our fear pushing us forward, our minds desperate to escape whatever was lurking behind us. It wasn't until we finally saw the light of the exit, the faint glow of daylight cutting through the entrance, that we stopped. We burst out of the mine, gasping for air, like we'd been held underwater for too long. I don't know who or what had been down there with us, but the feeling of being hunted, of someone stalking us in the darkness, never left me. It stayed with me long after we'd made it out. Even now, I can't shake the memory of that voice, the feeling that we weren't alone, and someone or something was waiting for us in the mine. And I can't explain it. I just know we were being followed. Story 4. It was late afternoon when my friend and I decided to visit Indian Cave in Blaine, Tennessee. The place had always intrigued me, rich in history, a former trading post, and a site where, in the 1980s, a 3,000-year-old Native American burial was unearthed. Once a show cave, now it was more of a local secret. The gift shop was the only sign of modern life. Cell lights, a few trinkets, and the occasional whisper about the place being haunted. We didn't think much of that. I mean, how often do you hear people joke about caves being haunted? We grabbed a light each and walked toward the entrance, the air growing damp as we made our way into the cave. The first part was easy. Just a winding path alongside a stream. Nothing unusual. The stone walls were cool to the touch, and the echo of our footsteps mixed with the rush of water. It wasn't exactly a tourist attraction anymore, but there was a strange charm about it. The cave was quiet, too quiet. We kept walking, following the stream for what felt like half a mile. The space was large, but the further we went, the more claustrophobic it felt. The ceiling began to dip lower, and eventually we hit the point where the stream started to flood the passage. We turned around and started heading back. We were laughing at how we'd probably walked too far. Typical, right? That's when the first noise came. At first I thought it was just the sound of the water, but then it came again. A voice, soft, almost like a whisper. I glanced at my friend, but she looked just as confused as I felt. The voice was too faint to make out, but it was definitely there. We stood still, holding our breath. "You hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," she replied, her tone tight. "But it's probably just the water, right?" I nodded, but my heart was beating a little faster now. Maybe it was just an echo, the way the sounds bounce around in a place like this. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We kept walking, and then I heard it again. Louder this time. It sounded like a conversation, but the words were jumbled and distorted, coming from behind us. No one was supposed to be back there. No one had passed us on the way in. And yet the voices grew clearer. We couldn't make out what they were saying, but the tone was unmistakable, urgent, like someone was warning us. I turned to look at my friend, her face pale, eyes wide. "Did you—" Before I could finish, we both heard something else. It was a sharp, guttural intake of breath. It was right behind us. I froze, my stomach dropping. We were too far into the cave now for anyone to be behind us. If someone had followed us in, we'd have heard them. No one else had passed us, and yet this breath, this sound, was unmistakably close. I looked at my friend. Her face had gone completely white, her lips trembling as she glanced over her shoulder, searching the darkness. I wanted to tell her to keep moving, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I was rooted to the spot, heart hammering in my chest. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I could feel the temperature in the cave drop. I tried to joke it off. "I didn't know ghosts needed inhalers," I said, my voice cracking despite my attempt at humor. But it didn't feel funny. It felt like we were being watched, like something was following us, just out of sight. We didn't say anything for a while. The only sound was our breathing, echoing off the walls. But the voices behind us kept coming, soft, whispering, like they were beckoning us. At one point, I could have sworn I heard a faint laugh, the kind that makes your skin crawl. But every time we turned around, the cave was empty. We picked up the pace, walking faster, trying to ignore the sound of footsteps that seemed to be right behind us. My friend's light flickered, casting strange shadows that only seemed to deepen the sense of dread. I had this overwhelming feeling that we weren't alone in that cave, that whatever it was, it didn't want us to leave. I don't know how much time passed. Minutes? Hours? But finally we reached the entrance. The fresh air hit me like a wave, and for a moment I couldn't breathe from relief. But I didn't dare look back. I didn't want to see what might have been following us. We were both silent as we stepped outside, still shaken, trying to make sense of what had happened. Neither of us wanted to speak about it. I kept my eyes on the ground, too afraid to look at my friend. When we reached the gift shop, I could feel the tension in my body start to loosen. We both took a deep breath, relieved to be out of that oppressive, silent darkness. The old man behind the counter looked up at us as we walked in. His expression was unreadable, but something about the way he studied us made me uneasy. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "We were in the cave. Did you, ever hear anything strange down there?" He didn't seem surprised by the question. In fact, his lips twitched like he'd been expecting it. "Oh, the cave's definitely haunted," he said matter-of-factly. "A lot of folks hear voices or feel like they're being followed. It's been that way for years." My blood ran cold. He spoke as though he was telling us about the weather, like it was no big deal, like he was used to it. I looked over at my friend, who was staring at the floor, her hands trembling. "People say the souls of the old traders still linger down there," the man continued, his voice low, "and the burial site too. It's best not to go too far, especially as it gets darker. We didn't say anything more. We didn't need to. The man had already said enough. We walked out of the shop, both of us too stunned to speak, still haunted by what we had heard, by what had followed us. And though the sun had set by then, I couldn't shake the feeling that the cave was still watching us, waiting for the next person foolish enough to ignore its warnings. Story 5. I live in a quiet town nestled between jagged cliffs and dense forests, places where the land feels ancient, untouched by time. For most of my life, I've wandered these ridges and valleys, exploring caves and forgotten tunnels. There's something about the earth's secrets that draws me in, a primal urge to understand what lies beneath the surface. But of course, sometimes you find things that you're better off not knowing. I learned that the hard way a few weeks ago, when a group of friends and I stumbled upon a cave that we never should have entered. We were out ridge walking along the cliff face, a habit we've grown accustomed to over the years. The area is notorious for its sharp drops and hidden grottos, places where the rocks form natural alcoves and caverns. It was one of those days when the sky hung low and gray, a perfect mix of weather to keep us from feeling too exposed. We had been walking for hours when we met one of the locals, a grotto member who had been exploring the cliffs for years. He seemed knowledgeable enough, and it was clear he was comfortable with the terrain. He pointed us toward the mouth of the cave, which was nearly impossible to see unless you knew exactly where to look. We followed him, our footsteps crunching on the dry earth, unaware of what we were about to find. The entrance was small, barely wide enough to fit one person at a time. After a moment of hesitation, we crawled inside. The air was damp and cold, and the sound of our breathing echoed off the walls as we ventured deeper into the darkness. The only light we had was the faint glow of our flashlights, but there was something unsettling about it, like the cave itself was swallowing the light. It didn't take long for us to notice the first strange thing. About 20 yards in, we came across a series of wires and a pipe that seemed to come out of the ceiling, leading into the rock above us. For a moment, we all stood there, staring at it in confusion. I've been in a lot of caves, but I've never seen anything like this. Why would someone drill through 60 feet of solid rock just to install electricity in a cave, especially one so remote? The wires weren't new either, faded and covered in dust, like they'd been there for years. And that pipe, it didn't look like it had any reason to be there, yet it seemed purposeful. The air in the cave grew heavier, the temperature dropping with every step we took further inside. We exchanged uneasy glances, but no one said anything. None of us wanted to be the one to suggest turning back. We pressed on, deeper into the cave. I remember the silence. It was so thick that it almost felt oppressive. The walls of the cave narrowed as we continued, the space around us constricting until we were walking in a tight, winding tunnel. Every few steps I'd hear a scrape or the distant echo of something that wasn't our own footsteps. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone in that cave, but none of us dared to voice the thought. We came to a large cavern, the ceiling stretching high above us, and that's when it happened. The first strange sound, a low guttural hum, seemed to vibrate through the very rock. I froze. The others heard it too. We all stopped in our tracks, holding our breath, straining to hear the source. The sound was faint but unmistakable, like a buzzing, a hum that seemed to be coming from deep within the earth. I had heard plenty of strange noises in caves before, but this was different. There was a quality to it, something mechanical, unnatural. And then it stopped. For a moment, everything was still. But that silence, it felt wrong, like something was waiting, watching. One of my friends, Sarah, spoke up. "Did anyone else hear that?" Her voice trembled. We all nodded, but no one said anything else. We just kept moving, the hum still echoing in our minds. We didn't get much further when we came upon the source of the noise. It was a massive, rusted metal door set into the rock wall. At first, it didn't make sense. Why would there be a door down here, hidden in the depths of the cave? It was old, far older than anything else in the cave, and the air around it was cold, colder than the rest of the cave. The door had a strange set of markings on it, some kind of faded symbols etched into the metal. They didn't look like anything from the world we knew. That's when we heard it again, the hum. Only this time, it was louder, closer, and it seemed to be coming from behind the door. I don't know why we decided to open it. Maybe it was the curiosity, or maybe it was the strange pull the cave had over us. But before anyone could say anything, one of the guys, Mark, stepped forward and began working at the lock. It clicked open far too easily. As the door creaked open, a gust of cold air rushed out, and for a split second, I thought I saw something moving inside. Just a shadow, maybe, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. We stepped through into a room that shouldn't have been there. It was a large chamber, smooth and unnatural. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, and the buzzing sound had grown to a low roar, vibrating the very ground beneath our feet. In the center of the room, there was a massive machine, its purpose unclear, but it was unlike anything any of us had seen before. Wires, pipes, and strange glowing panels covered its surface. Suddenly the hum stopped, and then there was something worse, something far worse. A voice, a soft, whispering voice echoed through the chamber, too faint to understand, but it was there. It wasn't human, it was wrong. It was as if the cave itself had come alive, speaking in a language that made my blood run cold. I don't know how long we stood there, frozen in fear, but it felt like an eternity. And when we finally turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind us with a deafening crash. We ran. No, we bolted. We didn't stop until we were back at the entrance of the cave, gasping for breath. I still don't understand what we saw down there, what that machine was, or who or what had been whispering in the dark. I don't know why the cave was so alive or why it felt like it was watching us. But I do know one thing. I'll never go back. No matter how much I want to understand what we found, some things are better left untouched. Story 6. It was supposed to be an adventure, a cool, laid-back day of spelunking with my family and a few close friends. We'd done it before, but nothing like this. The cave we had entered was deep, one of those places where the air feels thick with the weight of centuries. It was dark, of course, but that was part of the thrill, the deep, utter silence of it all. We'd been crawling through tunnels, squeezing through narrow fissures, and making our way down into the belly of the earth for hours. But I'll never forget that one spot. We'd come to a part of the cave where the rock narrowed into a slit, just big enough to crawl through. A kind of hidden passage, I guess. The way in was tight, knee-high, low enough that you had to get on your stomach and wriggle your way through, inch by inch. At first, I didn't think much of it. A squeeze. I've crawled through smaller spaces before. But as I pulled myself through, it became clear that this wasn't just another crawl space. Inside, the air was different. It wasn't just the dampness from the rocks. There was something strange, almost suffocating about it. The deeper I went, the tighter the space became. I remember feeling the walls press against me from both sides. The ceiling, too. Low, jagged, like the earth itself was slowly closing in. I pulled myself forward, my breath quickening. That's when I noticed the quartz. At first, I thought it was just an odd shimmer on the ceiling, but then I saw it more clearly. Beautiful crystals growing from the rock. The way they caught the light from our headlamps made them seem almost alive, sparkling, glistening, like a secret world inside the earth. A place untouched, hiding just beneath the surface. One by one, we crawled into the narrow opening. I think we were all a bit uneasy at first, but curiosity pushed us forward. We got deeper and deeper into the rock, further from the entrance until the tunnel opened into a crawl space. It wasn't much, just enough room for a few of us to move around. But as beautiful as it was, there was a feeling in the air, a heaviness, the kind of quiet that starts to crawl under your skin. And the smell. It was earthy, but there was something more, something metallic. We tried to shake it off, but it was there, lurking. We went deeper, farther into the cavernous space until we reached the end. It was like a small chamber, the walls lined with more crystals, growing in bizarre shapes. It felt like being in a different world, one that no one else had ever seen, untouched and hidden by the rock. It was beautiful, but as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. The first drops of water hit my back. It was slow at first, like the drips from a leaky pipe, but then they came faster and harder. At first, no one said anything. We just kept talking, pointing out the odd formations on the rock, trying to brush it off, but the trickle was persistent. We weren't paying attention, and it was already pulling at our feet. That's when we realized it was raining outside, but it was too late. I heard the first shout, distant at first, as someone near the entrance started moving. The water had already started to rise, but it was manageable at first. We had time, we thought. But then the water surged, rising faster than we could scramble. We started to panic. Small, quick movements at first, like instinct taking over. But it wasn't enough. The water was rising too quickly, too forcefully. "Shit!" someone yelled, the voice trembling. "We've got to go now." We crawled back toward the entrance, but the water was moving too fast, crashing against our bodies, pushing us back. Each breath I took felt like a struggle. I could feel the walls of rock pressing against me, trapping me in the crawl space. The crystals overhead scraped against my back. The space ahead of me was narrowing. The rocks were sharp and I had to crawl on my stomach, my chest tight against the cold, slick floor. But the water, it was up to my ankles, then my knees. My heart was pounding in my chest. I could hear everyone else in front of me, but their voices were muffled, distant, like they were in another world. Every second felt like an eternity. The water was rising, the coldness creeping up around my legs, my stomach. It started to splash against my body, and my breath came in quick gasps. I was still so far from the exit. I had to keep moving. I reached for the wall, pulling myself forward, inching along, feeling the pressure of the rocks around me. My brother was ahead of me, just a few feet, but it felt like miles. The water was up to my chest now, and every movement felt like I was dragging myself through thick mud. Panic set in. My heart was racing, my hands slick with sweat, even though the air was freezing. The sound of the rushing water was deafening now. It was as though the whole cave was filling with it, rushing in from some unseen place. I pushed forward, but I could feel the weight of the water behind me, pushing me back. I couldn't breathe, not with the rocks against my chest, not with the water surging up around me, swallowing me whole. And then I could feel the water at my lips. My stomach twisted. I couldn't breathe in, couldn't think. My body fought against the pull of the cave, against the current of water that threatened to drag me down. "Come on! You can do it!" My brother's voice echoed back to me, but it was fading, like the sound of his voice was getting drowned out by the water. I squeezed my eyes shut and kept moving. The rocks were scraping my back, my arms, but I had to keep going. And then, finally, I was out. The water was up to my chin by the time I reached the entrance, but I managed to crawl free, gasping for air. My heart was pounding in my chest, my limbs shaking uncontrollably. We all made it out, one by one, but none of us spoke. Not a single one of us looked back at that slit in the rock. It wasn't an adventure anymore. It was a warning, and I'll never forget the feeling of the water rising, the walls closing in around me, and the sense that, for a moment, I might never escape. Story 7. It was supposed to be a fun trip, just a couple of friends, caving through West Virginia. We'd been planning it for weeks, taking the through trip of Bowden's Cave, entering from one side, exiting from the other. Simple, right? We'd done this kind of thing before. We'd tackled caves in other parts of the country, some bigger, some smaller, but nothing ever prepared us for this night. We made our way through the cave without incident at first. The air was thick, damp, the smell of rock and earth suffocating in the stillness. The deeper we went, the more the cave seemed to close in around us, swallowing every sound except our footsteps and labored breathing. The rock formations were sharp in places, slippery in others, but we were all well equipped and we knew what we were doing. It was around 5 hours in, nearing the end of the trip, when everything started to unravel. My friend Sarah, who'd always been the more adventurous of us, was the first to go down. She didn't scream or shout, but I heard a sickening thud followed by a quiet hiss of pain. We turned, heart skipping, and saw her crouched on the ground, clutching her knee. Her face was contorted in agony. "I think I did something to my knee," she gasped, the words barely escaping her lips. We moved to help her, but it was obvious pretty quickly that the damage was bad. She couldn't put any weight on it, and crawling out was out of the question. Panic hit. The cave had become our prison, and we weren't going to get out easily. We took a moment to strategize. Emily, our other friend, kept whispering that we should wait, but I knew that wasn't an option. Every second we stayed in that cave was another second we were at risk. A couple of minutes passed, maybe more, but it felt like an eternity. Finally, I helped Sarah stand, the other two of us taking turns supporting her weight as we slowly made our way toward the back exit. But then things got worse. The back exit of Bowden's cave was supposed to be the easier of the two, but as we approached it, we realized it wasn't going to be easy for Sarah. It was a steep climb, requiring all the strength we had to get through. Every time we tried to lift her, she gasped in pain. She begged us to leave her, told us to go without her, but we couldn't do that. After a lot of huffing and struggling, we finally made it to the back exit at around 1 a.m., drenched in sweat and exhaustion. The cold night air hit us like a slap, and I could finally feel my heart rate slowing. We were out of the cave, but we weren't safe. Not yet. We still had to make it through the woods back to the car. The area around the cave entrance was remote, deep in the Appalachian Mountains, far from any real civilization. The trees were thick, the underbrush dense. Even in the middle of the night, with only a faint sliver of moonlight breaking through the canopy, we could make out the shadows of branches and shrubs. It felt like we were being watched, like the trees were alive, bending and shifting, ready to swallow us whole. Sarah was limping, but at least we were out of the cave. We moved slowly, the pain from her knee making every step agony. I kept my eyes on her and on Emily, who walked ahead. The silence was unnerving. We should have been able to hear the usual night sounds, the chirping of crickets, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals moving through the brush. But there was nothing, not a single sound. That's when it came. A low, guttural growl. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before. It rumbled through the woods, shaking the ground beneath us. My body froze. My breath caught in my throat. My eyes darted around the darkness, trying to find the source. But there was nothing. Then we saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, just beyond the trees, two eyes, glowing yellow low to the ground, suddenly appeared. They were right at eye level, staring straight at us. And before I could process what I was seeing, the eyes dropped, like something had just crouched, its form blending into the shadows. I turned to Emily, my heart pounding in my chest. "Did you see that?" I whispered, but my voice cracked. She nodded, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. "What the hell was that?" It moved, slowly, deliberately, its eyes following our every move. I didn't want to look again, but I couldn't tear my gaze away. It was like a nightmare unfolding in front of me, too real to be a hallucination. "Move," I whispered to Sarah, grabbing her arm and pulling her in the direction of the car. But it was too late. The growl came again, louder this time. And this time, it wasn't just a noise. It was the sound of something stepping forward. Heavy, slow, as though it was toying with us. My pulse raced as I pushed Sarah forward, my legs trembling. I couldn't even hear Emily's footsteps behind me, but I knew she was close. We had to move faster, get to the car, but every step felt like it was taking forever. My mind was racing. Was it a bear? A mountain lion? I didn't care. All I knew was that it was too close. We weren't alone anymore. Then suddenly the noise stopped. The woods fell silent again, unnervingly so. We reached the car in what felt like hours, though it was only minutes. I slammed the door behind me, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. When I finally turned the ignition, the engine roared to life and we didn't look back. We didn't talk. We didn't even breathe until we were safely back at the hotel. To this day, I don't know what we encountered in those woods. The eyes, low, eerie, and moving like something hunting us, still haunt my thoughts. Some nights I can still hear that growl echoing in the back of my mind. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to. The thing is, there's a feeling you get when you're in the wild, in places where humans don't belong, where the world seems to shift beneath your feet. Story 8. I'll never forget the day we went cave exploring. It's a memory that still haunts me every time I close my eyes. There were four of us: James, my best friend, and a couple of other guys. I can't remember the last time we had all hung out together, but we figured a little adventure would be a good way to kill time. So we set off to the nearby caves, the kind that aren't exactly on any tourist map. Now, I should probably mention right off the bat, this wasn't a professional expedition or anything. We weren't equipped for anything serious. We had a couple of flashlights, some snacks, and, well, a lot of overconfidence. We thought we could handle it, especially with James leading the charge. He'd always been the guy who took risks, the one who'd laugh in the face of danger. We descended into the cave, the air growing colder as we went deeper. The walls were slick with moisture, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath our boots and the faint drip of water echoing around us. There was no moonlight down here, just the weak glow from our flashlights cutting through the darkness like knives. The deeper we went, the more oppressive it felt. The air was thick, heavy, like something was pressing in on us from all sides. But like idiots, we pressed forward. None of us had any real idea of what we were doing, except for James, who insisted we keep going. "It's just a cave," he'd said, his voice full of bravado. "What could go wrong?" We were about an hour in when it happened. James, who had been leading, tripped over something hidden in the dark. There was a sharp crack as his body hit the ground, followed by a hiss of air as he grunted in pain. His flashlight flew out of his hands and tumbled into the darkness. I could hear the sound of it bouncing off the rocks, then silence. Complete silence. "Shit," he cursed. "Where's the flashlight?" We all froze, standing there in the dark, disoriented. The only thing we could hear now was the sound of our own breathing. The flashlight was the only source of light, and without it, we were completely blind. I could feel the tension building between us, the pressure of the darkness weighing heavier with each passing second. "Anyone got their phone?" someone asked, their voice shaking. But I think we all knew the answer. We hadn't brought anything with us except the flashlights. "Don't worry," James said, sounding a little embarrassed, but mostly trying to keep his cool. "I'll find it." We all started moving, groping the ground, trying to find the damn flashlight. My hands brushed against cold, jagged rocks, the texture unnerving in the dark. I tried not to think about how far we'd gone into the cave, how lost we might already be. Then finally I felt something cold and smooth under my fingers. It wasn't the flashlight, but a small box. At first I thought it was just a rock, but as I moved my fingers around it, I realized it wasn't. It was shaped like a box, square, with something metal and old-looking attached to the front. I grabbed it, and something inside me just froze. I didn't know why I was so drawn to it, but I was. "Hey, I found something," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The others stopped moving. "What is it?" James asked, his voice tense. "I don't know," I replied. "A box. Looks old. Probably just junk." But there was something about the box, something that felt wrong. I didn't want to open it. I just knew I shouldn't. But James, ever the one to challenge danger, moved in closer, his eyes glinting with curiosity. "Let me see it," he said, his voice too eager. "We got to find out what's inside." I didn't want to hand it over, but I did. I don't know why. Maybe I was just scared to touch it any longer, scared of what it might represent. Maybe I thought if I let him open it, the weight of whatever curse lay within would fall on him and not me. It sounds stupid now, but at the time, that was my thought process. James fiddled with the latch on the box. It creaked as he pried it open. And then we all heard it, a low, eerie groan that echoed in the cave. A sound I can't explain, like the earth itself was mourning, or worse, warning us. The box opened with a snap, and we all leaned in, even though every bone in my body screamed at me to back away. I shone the flashlight inside. There, nestled in a bed of grime and dirt, was a human skull. The bones were brittle, yellowed, and cracked. It wasn't just the skull either. There were other bones, fragments scattered around, as if this thing had been here for years. But the worst part, the part that made my stomach churn, was the look in the skull's hollow eyes. It was like it was staring right at me, accusing me of something. I couldn't look away. "Holy shit," James muttered, his voice shaking for the first time. What the hell is this? We all just stood there, frozen. No one moved. The air felt thick, suffocating. It was as if the walls of the cave were closing in on us, pressing in on our lungs, pushing us to leave, to run. And we did. In an instant, we were on our feet, scrambling in the dark. We didn't care about the flashlight, didn't care about the box anymore. We just ran. I could hear my friends' panicked breaths beside me, their footsteps echoing off the walls like a stampede. We bolted for what felt like hours, but I'm sure it wasn't even 5 minutes. When we finally made it to the entrance of the cave, I didn't stop. I kept running, right out into the daylight, gasping for air. I couldn't shake the image of that skull from my mind, those empty eyes. Even now I can still feel it watching me, even when I'm in my own house, in the safety of my own bed. I don't know what we uncovered in that cave, or who that skull belonged to. Maybe it was a warning, maybe it was something worse. But I can tell you one thing. I'm never going back there. Not in a million years. And I don't think I'll ever feel safe again. Story 9. I live in a small town that sits just on the outskirts of a forest, where the land starts to stretch out into open fields and rolling hills. It's a quiet place, the kind of town where people know each other by name, and the closest thing we have to danger is a speeding car or the occasional bear wandering into someone's garden. But there are things in these woods, things that no one talks about. Not allowed anyway. One summer evening, I decided to take my dog, Max, on one of our usual walks. He's a stubborn, energetic mutt, the kind that pulls on the leash just to get a better smell of something. But I love him to death. We've been walking these trails for years, and I knew every twist and turn by heart. But that day, something was different. We'd been walking for a while, well past the usual route I take, when I spotted something I'd never noticed before. A narrow, rocky opening carved into the base of a small hill. It was so subtle, hidden away among the trees and overgrown brush, that I almost missed it. But Max, with his nose to the ground, pulled me toward it as if he knew exactly where he was going. "Where are you going, buddy?" I muttered to myself, tightening my grip on his leash. He stopped at the entrance to the opening, his tail wagging, his ears perked up in that curious way he does when he's unsure but intrigued. The tunnel-like passageway was dark, only a small sliver of light creeping through the trees above. At first I thought it might just be some old animal den or a drainage pipe, something harmless. But then I saw it. An iron gate, half rusted and bent, ran across the mouth of the tunnel. It looked ancient, like something that had been forgotten for years. There was a sign on the gate, but the writing was too faded to read. The air around it felt heavy, thick, as though it had been trapped in there for decades. "Come on, Max," I said, tugging on his leash to pull him away. But he refused to move. His eyes were locked on the tunnel. His ears were flat against his head, and a low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. "Max, stop it," I snapped. But he didn't listen. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something about this place felt wrong. But I didn't want to turn back just yet. I'm not a coward, and I figured we'd check it out just for a minute. I pushed through the gate, which creaked eerily as it shifted on its hinges, and stepped into the tunnel. It was much larger than I expected. The walls were jagged, and the air inside felt damp, heavy, like I was walking through something that had been hidden from the world for too long. Max was hesitant at first, but he followed me in, his nose twitching as he took in the smells of the place. We walked deeper. The light from outside faded quickly, replaced by a pitch-black darkness that seemed to swallow us whole. The sound of my boots crunching on the gravel beneath us echoed unnervingly, and Max kept pulling ahead, dragging me further into the gloom. I could feel my pulse quickening. My breath started coming in short gasps. The air was stifling. Max stopped suddenly. He let out a whimper, then turned to face me, his fur standing on end. "What's wrong, boy?" I whispered. But before I could kneel down to comfort him, I heard something, a soft, slithering sound. At first I thought it was my imagination, but then I heard it again, closer this time, the unmistakable sound of something moving. "Max," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We need to go." But it was too late. The smell hit me like a punch to the stomach. Rot, decay, a fetid stench that made my eyes water and my throat burn. It was the kind of smell that made you want to gag, like something had been left to rot for far too long. I turned around to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. It felt as if the darkness itself was holding me there, trapping me in place. Max was barking now, a sharp, panicked sound that echoed off the walls. I could hear his claws scraping against the stone floor as he backed away from something. My heart raced as I tried to pull him toward me. But the noise, the slithering, shuffling noise, it was getting louder, closer. I snapped my head around, my breath catching in my throat. There, in the farthest corner of the tunnel, a shadow moved. I couldn't make it out at first. It was too dark, too fast. But there was something about it that made my blood run cold. It was large, much larger than any animal I had ever seen, and it moved with a grotesque, unnatural fluidity, like it was gliding. My stomach churned, and my mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. Then I saw it clearly. A body, a carcass of some sort, half rotted and twisted into an impossible shape. The skin was stretched tight over its bones, and its limbs were bent in directions they should never be able to bend. Its eyes were wide open, milky and lifeless, but they seemed to be staring right at me, locked onto my soul in a way that no dead animal should. The smell of decay intensified as I backed away, my feet finally responding, scrambling to get me out of there. Max yelped, tugging at the leash, pulling me toward the exit, but I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. The only thing I could focus on was getting the hell out of that tunnel. We burst out into the daylight, gasping for air, the oppressive weight of the darkness lifting as we emerged into the open fields. My legs were shaking, my heart pounding in my chest, but I didn't stop. We ran. We didn't stop until we were back at the trailhead, and even then, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting something to be following us. I never went back.